Yeah, it's fine. Huh?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming, for joining us. It's all too easy to come to a summit like this and get caught up in a mood of exaggerated enthusiasm, simply because of the very nature of diplomacy and the instinct to be polite, false hope, and not to think in any way that the job is done, because it is not. There is still a very long way to go. But all that being said, I am cautiously optimistic in the sense that on the way to the G20 in Rome, I said to some of you on the plane that if this was a football match, then the current score would be 5-1 down in the match between humanity and climate change. And I think what you could say today, after 2 days of talks with around 120 world leaders, is that we've pulled back a goal, or perhaps even two. And I think we're going to be able to take this thing to extra time, because there's no doubt that some progress has been made. We're ending the Great Chainsaw Massacre with more than 85% of the world's forests to be protected by the end of this decade, an unprecedented agreement by 122 countries now, backed by the biggest ever commitment of public funds for forest conservation, with much more still to come from the private sector. We've got 90% of the world's economy working towards net zero, up from less than a third when the UK took up the COP reins, including India keeping 1 billion tonnes of carbon out of the atmosphere by switching half its power grid to renewable sources. More than 100 countries have just signed up to cut their methane emissions by 2030. When we were selected as hosts of COP26, just 1% of the world's economy had met the post-Paris obligation to improve on their 2030 emission targets. Today, that figure stands at 80%. And it's not just that we're putting forward better targets or bigger targets. The world has been actually putting forward the plans to reach those targets. Billions of dollars have been committed to supporting developing and vulnerable countries. Big business has stepped up with the launch of the Glasgow Breakthroughs this afternoon, and our Clean Green Initiative idea, the Build Back Better World idea that Joe Biden talks about, is catching on, and it's taking the green industrial revolution worldwide. For example, we're working with South Africa's President Ramaphosa to deliver his ambitious vision for faster, greener growth. And what I would say is, we've been asking for action, as you know, on coal, cars, cash, and trees. And after just a couple of days, we can certainly begin to tick 3 of those boxes. If you can begin, we're beginning to write the tick. And that's all happened because we were able to come together in person in Glasgow and do this, make it happen at COP26. And of course, it's only part of the story. Although the UK has this week committed a further $1 billion of international climate finance, taking our total to £12.6 billion by 2025, £12.6 billion that we're committing to climate finance. Actually, just a few hours ago, Japan announced another $10 billion over the next 5 years, a big commitment from Japan. The reality is that the developed world will still be late in hitting the $100 billion target. And it's brilliant that so many countries have embraced net zero this week, but we're going to keep working with all the leaders around the world to get them there sooner, to accelerate their timetable. We've now protected 85%, we've got measures to protect 85% of the world's forests and 90% of the world's economy working to net zero. Those commitments will be 100% useless if the promises made here are not followed up with real action. As Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados so passionately warned us yesterday, climate change is not some parochial political issue. For tens of millions of people around the world, it is literally a matter of life or death. Those economies need 1.5 to survive. So I'll be watching proceedings, we'll be watching proceedings very closely to make sure we keep moving forward and there are no U-turns, no sliding back from where we've got to. But I think we can be confident about one thing in the days ahead, the couple of weeks we've got. The clock on the doomsday device that I talked about is still ticking. But we've got a bomb disposal team on site, and they're starting to snip the wires, I hope some of the right wires. And my message to them, to the negotiators, is very simple. The leaders of the world may have left or are leaving COP now, but I can tell you that the eyes of the world, the eyes of the populations of the world are on you, and the eyes of the British government and all the other governments that care about this are on our negotiators, and we have your numbers. Thank you all very much. I'm going to go to the media now, and we'll begin with Laura Koonsberg of the BBC.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. The Chinese have said today that there are still significant gaps. We know also that the leader of the UN has said he's worried there isn't enough trust between developing countries and developed countries to be able to get a deal over the line. You've said that the leaders of the world have scored a couple of goals, improved things from 5-1, but what or who is going to score the extra 2 or 3 goals you still need?
Thank you, Laura. I think that's entirely right, in the sense that the issues remain very difficult. We've seen some big moves on tackling deforestation that I've talked about. I think the Indian move on decarbonising their power system, getting towards renewables in the way that they're pledging to do is huge and terrific. I think that the commitment that Japan made on cash, the $10 billion over 5 years, that's big money, and that will make a big difference in engendering that confidence, Laura. But I think the crucial thing that is really happening, that if there's one thing that starts to give me confidence or optimism anyway, it's that we are starting to create, for the countries that find it most difficult to transition away from fossil fuels, we're starting to create those coalitions of support to help them to move on. And so to help Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa in his vision, several countries, including the UK, are now working to supply $8.5 billion to help accelerate that transition away from coal, to help decarbonize the South African economy in a major way. And you're starting to see that kind of approach taken around the world with some of the countries that find it most difficult. And if I had to, I've told you I was at Paris, and I remember what it was like. And we had this great sense that we'd agreed this thing that we were gonna try and cut CO2 together. But it was also a slightly floaty feeling, because we didn't know how on earth we were going to do it. And there was no roadmap. There was no very clear sense of how you could do it. I think what you're starting to see here at COP26 in Glasgow is a sense of how actually you can deliver those cuts in CO2. But, I'm not going to disagree with you, Laura. There is a long way to go. Anushka Astana of ITV.
Thank you. Prime Minister, I'm not sure if the Prime Minister of Belize would share your cautious optimism. I spoke to him today and he said developed countries are not doing enough. He said that the West got rich on lavish lifestyles and that now it was telling developing countries they couldn't do that. He says if that is your message, then they need much more money and much more action. So let me ask, do you understand the anger of the Prime Minister of Belize? And also, you're not going to get a deal that's good enough on coal, are you?
I think you're absolutely right, Anushka, to highlight the feelings of people in Belize, but in vulnerable states around the world that are in the front line in the fight against climate change. And it's been very humbling to sit here and to listen over the last weeks, months, to colleagues of Mia Motley and Barbe. You heard her at the UN General Assembly say the same thing. Why should they suffer this immediate impact, this loss and damage because of emissions that we in our country began to produce 250 years ago? Now, we can say, well, for the vast majority of that period, we had no idea that the CO2 emissions we were producing were doing that damage. It's only really been in the last few decades that we've started to understand the whole greenhouse effect. But we owe a special duty to those countries, and that's why the Prime Minister of Belize is right to point to the need for cash. That's why the 100 billion is so important, and it's good that Japan has stepped up, but other countries are going to have to do more. You're absolutely right. What we need is to see more cash. We need to see more movement on cars. We haven't even discussed cars yet. That's for later on. That's for the next few days. We must see progress on that too. I think we've made some good progress on trees. But when it comes to helping countries to transition, then a huge effort is needed. What I think we have is the tools to do it, and we certainly have, in theory, we have the finance to do it. Mark Carney, who's running the Global Finance Initiative here, would say that there are hundreds of trillions of dollars. Some other people would say it was tens of trillions. It's still a huge amount of money, and that money can be leveraged in by the public sector and by our investments. So I'm not going to disagree with what the Prime Minister of Belize has said, or indeed with anybody who says that the world, in the remaining days that we have in this COP, the world has a lot more to do. Mesa Hall of the Express, and Beth, you're next. Mesa.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. A couple of days ago, you put the chances of success here at about 6 in 10. I just wondered if you had a new figure for that after the talks today. And outside of the enthusiasm that you've talked about in this summit, in the country, a lot of people are concerned about the cost implications of the dash for net zero, what it might mean for them and their families. Some of your MPs are concerned about it. About a week ago, a poll suggested that a majority of people would like to see a referendum on the idea of net zero. Would you, as a seasoned referendum campaigner, would you think about that?
Thanks, Mesa. Look, I just want to say one thing about the overall economics of it. First of all, if we don't do this, if we don't fix our climate, it will be an economic catastrophe as well as an environmental catastrophe, right? I think people need to understand that as point number one. This is the only way to fix this is to reduce CO2 and tackle climate change. I also happen to think that there's a great wisdom in the British people, and I think that they can see that this is an issue that needs to be fixed. And they may not listen to me, but they certainly listen to Sir David Attenborough, and they look at what's actually happening around the world. They look at the fires, they look at the floods, they look at the hurricanes and the increased incidence of all three, much increased incidence, and they think something's happening here. And they look at that graph. You see that graph on yesterday morning? Incredibly powerful graph that Sir David Attenborough produced of the increase in in CO2 emissions over the last few thousand years, the graph of CO2 emissions, and then the temperatures, and how temperatures track CO2 emissions. And then that spike in CO2 emissions, that anthropogenic spike, vertical movement upwards, and accompanied now, we're seeing, by increases in temperature. And they can see that, and they're not dumb. And they can see that this is something that needs to be tackled. And we will tackle it by creating many, many hundreds of thousands of high-wage, high-skilled jobs in green technology. And in the Green Industrial Revolution plan alone, there are plans for 440,000 more jobs in all sorts of things, from battery technology to wind farms and many, many other things. So the economy is going this way. I think it's a good thing, and we can use this moment to trigger greater growth and greater prosperity, but do it in a green way. And I do think people get that. And as for your brilliant suggestion of a referendum, Mesa, I think this country's probably had enough referendums to be going on with for a while. That's my general view on the matter. Anyway, Beth.
Thank you, Prime Minister. It's been a really, really intense few days, both here in Rome, both in Rome and in Glasgow. But just to use your football analogy, you talked about being able to equalise in extra time. But isn't the sad reality of all of this that if China is not on the pitch, Team World is not going to be able to equalise? That is the elephant in the room, isn't it? And on forests, Sky News is on the ground in Brazil, where authorities don't seem to care at all about mass deforestation. Do you really believe that the president of Brazil will follow through on the pledges he made? Is he taking it seriously? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, on really good questions. First of all, on China, yes, it's true that President Xi isn't here. But on the other hand, the Chinese team is very high level. He didn't want. I talked to him. He didn't want to come because of the pandemic, and you've got to respect that. The same was the case for Vladimir Putin. But that doesn't mean the Chinese are not engaging. They've made the commitment on net zero by the middle of the century, by 2060 or earlier. And the key thing that China is saying is that they want to. Get to a peak in their carbon emissions by 2030 or before. And when you listen to what Xi Jinping says, the question is how much before? And that's the issue. And that's what we're discussing with China. Because there is still, there's a world difference between peaking in 2030 in your emissions from China and peaking in 2025. And so that's where the conversation is. That's where we're keeping the pressure up. And on your point about forests, we're continuing to engage with China, and we're seeing some signs of progress. But do we want more? Then that's absolutely true. Yes, we do, but we want more from everybody. And just on, do you want to come to forests, or do you want to do a follow-up on China? I think that we need China to make commitments. China has already made a substantial commitment in the sense they've moved to net zero by the middle of the century, 2060 or before, as Xi Jinping says. Let's see where we get to with China and peaking by pre-2030. Let's see what that adds up to. But China has fantastic power to make change in the way it runs its economy. They've committed to no new financing of overseas coal. That's a big change already. You're starting to see the impact of that Chinese decision to stop financing coal overseas. In the whole Asia-Pacific region already, you can see people moving away from, just at this COP, just in the last couple of days, you'll have seen the pledges that really follow from that Chinese action. So I'm grateful for that. Do we need more progress? You bet we need more progress from China and from everybody here at this gathering. On deforestation, and your point about your reporter in Brazil not finding any evidence that on the ground that there's any willingness to stop cutting down trees. It's not just world leaders who are saying this. What we're doing is saying that companies that invest in commodities or that buy commodities that result from deforestation, whatever they may be, will not be invested in, and there's been an agreement by companies around the world that they will no longer support or invest in commodities, whether with palm oil or whatever, that result from deforestation. You've heard what the big commodity producers, Cargill and others, have had to say. That's a massive step forward. That's a big change. And secondly, the world's financial institutions have stepped up and said that, well, they won't finance companies that get involved in deforestation. So financial institutions worth trillions and trillions of pounds will not be supporting deforestation. And the pressure comes from consumers around the world who will say to those banks, whether it's Aviva or Barclays or whoever else, if they break that pledge, there will be a democratic, a consumer price to pay. And the same goes for the companies that break that pledge. So there's been a big shift in the balance of power, I think, over forests towards consumers, towards people who care about it and who want to stop the forests being chopped down, even if governments do break the pledges that they're making. Do you see what I'm saying? I think that's been the important thing. Let's go to Liz Piper of Reuters.
Hi, Prime Minister. The developed world promised in 2020 to deliver the 100 billion. They still haven't done that. Do you think what's the likelihood of it actually coming next year? And surely the price tag should be a little bit higher. Also, what was your reaction to India's net zero target being at 2070?
Thanks, Liz. I think that the 100 billion is still something that we're pushing for earlier. We're going to get it by 2023. But we need to see more. I thought that what Japan had to say was great, but this ain't over. We need further action from countries around the world, and we're certainly going to keep the pressure up. And sorry, Liz, remind me, what was your second question? India, yeah. Look, just on India, I think the most important thing that they've said is that they want to decarbonize so much of their power system by 2030. That's a massive commitment, moving up from 175 to 450 gigawatts of clean energy. That's a huge commitment, and if they put that in their NDC, even more powerful. Harry Cole of The Sun.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. You say the score is now 5-3, but who scored the goal?
5-2.
5-2.
I mean, I said it could be even 5-3.
Who scored the goals, though? Was it the Queen? Was it Biden? Was it Greta? Was it you? Who's had the biggest impact on this summit? And if I may, it seems that President Macron is already back in Paris tonight, having seemingly left early. Was that a snub after your fallout? And could you possibly clear up whether you did offer him more generous terms for French fishing boats in order to keep talks alive?
Thanks. Look, I think that it's a team game, this thing, Harry. And I think I think everybody's working very hard together to keep 1.5 alive, and I think 1.5 degrees alive, and I think a lot of I would pay tribute to all the individuals that you've mentioned, or with the possible exception of myself, but I would certainly pay tribute to everybody for a big effort, and that effort will continue. We will keep going right to the wire. And on our relations with France, I really renew what I've said before. We are working very, very closely with our French friends and partners on the things that matter most to the people of the world, and that is tackling climate change, reducing CO2, and by comparison with that hugely important issue, the ones you mentioned are really vanishingly unimportant. But since you ask about whether the UK has changed its position, let me put it that way, changed its position on the fishing issue, the answer is no. But I hope that will do, folks. And thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you. Thank you.